So today on Elemental Podcast, I have the sincere and wild honor of sitting with Maria DeLiberato, one of my absolute all-time long life best friends. And we always give you, the person, the chance to essentially give your bio. And as always, I gave you zero prep on what to expect today, which is not anything really new. We're just going to go with what we know will be more likely a deep and meaningful connection and conversation for us. So, if you would, just give people a little snapshot of what feels appropriate about who you are now.
Sure. I'm Maria, as Annette said. I teach at Kodawari 6 a.m. classes 3 days a week, and I think sort of what informs my yoga teaching the most is I'm also a lawyer, a death penalty lawyer, a public defender. I run a nonprofit about the death penalty, criminal
About
justice,
abolishing.
about abolishing the death penalty. Criminal justice reform and sort of giving a voice to the voiceless is kind of my jam, and always has been.
Okay. Anything else in there that you need to mention? Just giving you a chance. There's nothing that I think is missing.
Yeah, I'm annoyingly energetic at 6 a.m.
Yes,
you guys
I can confirm this.
come and see me, and I would not be the kind of yoga teacher that I am without the day job that I have, and I would not be the kind of lawyer that I am without my yoga practice.
Okay, that's beautiful. So, Elemental Podcast as a whole is driven around some of the concepts of what creates health. And I think our conversation in specific is going to be about the aspect of communal health, global community. And inevitably for me, this will touch on how we heal, where we might have gone wrong, where we can go right, if there was such a thing as wrong and right. The 7 tenets that I always try to myself remember, that we are pretty enmeshed in with one another. First one is sleep. So you get shit sleep. We could talk about that. And you also know, like, you're not a number one sleeper.
Not so good.
Hydration, which you constantly carry, water now, because I have hammered this into you. Eating, so nutritious, nourishing food, also not your greatest forte, and you have over time developed a capacity to open the door to other people feeding you, because that's how you allow help to flow into your life.
Yes.
Movement as keeping a movement practice, and again, very graciously, I can say that I know what your movement practice looks like, and this will be a good segue for a little bit later. You use movement as a way to moderate difficult, challenging. It's a great way for you to off-gas stress hormones so that you can be more discerning and hold priorities over a long view. So we're going to talk about why movement practice is so critical to optimization as a human. Sunlight exposure, which you and I do a lot of. Let's get outside together. You do a lot of let's get outside at all, whether that's swimming, biking, walking, paddleboarding. Climbing mountains used to be baseball once upon a time, correct? Or softball, more appropriately. And then community, which is a thing that you engage in. You build community. You're a driver of community, and you have many communities to which you owe your allegiance. And then the 7th one is the mindfulness, being aware of all the prior 6. How do they weave in to create a meaningful, intention-filled life for you? So let's, if you're okay with it, let's talk about a little bit what motivated you to become a death row lawyer. What was it that shifted you from being in law school to deciding that there might be a niche or a specialty? I don't know what the right lawyer terms are. So
Yeah. I mean, so interestingly, I kind of accidentally became a death penalty lawyer. I always knew I wanted to do criminal work. I was a prosecutor in law school, and after law school, I started as a prosecutor in Miami. I grew up in Pennsylvania, of course, and I just sort of had enough of cold weather, and I love my family with all of my heart, and I was ready to do something different. And so I packed up and moved to Miami. I didn't know a single soul. I took the Florida bar and I started working at the state attorney's office there. So I was actually on the prosecution side, and I did that for a couple of years. And then I was looking to move to Tampa for some personal reasons, and I was looking for a job. And I came across this job, which it was it's called Capital Collateral Regional Counsel, but basically it's a state agency, a state sort of appellate public defender's office, if you will, representing only people who had already been sentenced to death. And so I had always been opposed to the death penalty. My family was Catholic, I was raised Catholic. I never really sort of understood it as kind of a punishment. And basically, I was kind of told your job would be to review death sentences and sort of try to get people off of death row, but most of them trying to get them towards life without the possibility of parole, which is the only other option in Florida for a first degree murder. So I kind of fell into the job, and I think the first Friday, so I started on a Monday, and that Friday, my then supervisor, who later became my law partner and is still one of my dear friends, actually went to dinner with her last night, Maria DeLiberato, she was my supervisor then, and she took me to death row because she had recently had a prosecutor that came to do this work, and she quit after like a month. And Maria was like, I'm not having it, I'm not wasting my time like teaching a new lawyer. And so she's like, I'm taking her to death row.
Let's get into the hot sauce right out of the gate.
Yeah. And so, I mean, 5 days in, and I had no idea what to expect. I'm 27.
I was going to ask you how.
Yeah, I think I was like 27.
A mere baby.
Yes, my brain had just finished developing, which we can also talk about later. And so I had no idea. I was like, am I going into Silence of the Lambs? Like, I had zero clue of what I'm walking into. And so we met kind of, 13 clients that day. And as we
13.
Yeah. So that was our team. We had 13 clients. And we kind of met them all back to back. And so it's hard to kind of keep track of like who did what and why were they there and this and that. And I remember leaving and we were driving home and Maria was like, what did you think? And I was like, it's so sad. Like it was just this sort of overwhelming sadness. And yet behind that there was also hope. There was also interest. A lot of the clients were like, tell me about yourself and what do you like to do? And do you have a family? Do you have pets? And a lot of times
those were their questions
to me. Yeah, because a lot of times in these cases they go on for so long, and there may not be anything specifically happening with their cases. So sometimes it's just a social visit.
We throw his ass up on there.
And quite frankly, like a lot of the people on death row don't get a lot of social interaction, right? That's kind of how they ended up there in the first place. But so for them, it's just an opportunity to kind of meet somebody new and ask some questions, and so it was kind of this beautiful thing. And I mean, 5 days in, I was like, well, this is what I'm supposed to do, and that was in 2006. So that was September of 2006 was when I started that, and 18 years later, here we are still doing that.
Okay. Was that your first time in a prison or a facility? What's the right term?
Yeah, so it was a prison. It was my first time in a prison. I had been in the local jails before when I was a prosecutor. Less so. I mean, now I'm in the jail every day, all the time. But I had only been in the jail maybe once or twice, so it was kind of my first time. And it's very jarring. And death row is in Stark, Florida, so it's like in the middle of kind of nowhere. And to get to death row, you pull to the prison. You have to go through security and pat down and all the things, and then they.
And that was, I have an imagination in 2006. Pat down, security, all the things.
Yeah.
Was new.
Yeah, I mean they had always sort of done these, I think, but it was very it's very intense. And if you ever had a TSA, a pat down at TSA, no matter what, you get it that it has to be that way for security, but when somebody physically puts their hands on you, it's jarring no matter what. And so
even when you know it's coming.
Right, it's kind of that glimpse of it always makes me think of wow, I know this is coming and I'm uncomfortable. And so, to kind of imagine the violations and boundaries that get crossed that, lead my clients to the places where they end up being often. But yeah, so you go in right that way.
And at 2006, had you developed yet because I know the other thing that I forgot to mention about you is that you are a runner.
Reformed runner, I like to call myself.
Okay.
Yes, I am still running very infrequently. So no, in 2006, I was marathon training. I did not have a yoga practice. I was just running all the time, and when I moved to Tampa, I was training for the Tampa Marathon, but my job now was sort of sitting a lot more. When I was a prosecutor, I was in court a lot. I was standing up all the time. I was moving during the day, and this death row job was a lot more sedentary because, again, the cases take forever to move, and a lot of times it's just research and writing and less time in court. So it was a lot more sedentary, and I was running and just like running and not stretching ever.
No stretching, running. Okay. So much to potentially unpack there.
Yeah.
And 2006 was the start of this particular career. When did you add yoga as a practice to your life?
So that was in 2009. Well, a little earlier than that. I had started training for a marathon. It was the beginning of 2007, and I hurt my back, and I was pretty miserable. And my mom had always encouraged me to like do yoga. She, did some, and so I started some like TV program called Namaste Yoga, which is like a Canadian program. It was like 23 minutes, and it was 3 sequences, and they would repeat the middle one, and it was like so basic. I could do it in my living room. It was on demand. And I could not, my hamstrings, it was laughable. They're not super long now, but it is laughable where I was then to now. And so I did that for a long time, and it helped, and it felt better. And then I was ready to maybe try a class, and I went to then Yogini. Tom Taylor was my first yoga teacher, and it was a beat girl class.
Sit up time!
I like still hear his voice in my head.
Of course.
And he closed class by always saying, act as though you have the power to change the world, because you do. And I was like, oh, man, I love that. And I was just swear. I'm sorry. I figured I was allowed.
You're like, I'm gonna check you.
I said cats are dicks in class this morning, and people sort of looked at me sideways, but it's fine. So
A lot of cats are dicks. That's what makes a cat not a dog.
So I did that a fair amount. Still was like, I'm gonna get back to running. I gotta get back to running. And it just, wasn't happening. And then I was getting ready for my oral argument. So part of being an ethical lawyer is you get to argue before the Florida Supreme Court, which is kind of terrifying. And
That's a big deal.
Right, and it's someone's life, right? Like the outcome of this appeal depends on whether my client lives or dies. And so I had my first oral argument. It was in April of 2009, and I was like, I left work early, and I was like, I'm gonna go to a yoga class. And I went to Yogini. It was a noon class. It was your class, but you weren't there. So Lorraine was teaching, who was just lovely and very kind,
Sweet, tender,
and it was great.
very accommodating.
Yeah, and it was like, I'm like, this is lovely, and I felt really ready, and I went into the argument the next day, and I was like, man, I really love the way I feel. I'm gonna go back next Wednesday. So I went back next Wednesday. It was Lorraine again, and I'm good at this yoga thing. It's great. Third Wednesday I go back, and it's you. And I'm like, well, she's a lunatic.
The fuck's wrong with this individual?
I was like, I can't hold down dog this long. What is she? What, 3-legged down dog? I could, and I was like, I was a runner, right? I'm in shape. Couldn't do any of the things. I was like, this is a bunch of bullshit. And I left, and I went with Mari. Mari came with me, and I was like, maybe like 2 hours later, I was like, that woman's nuts. And she's like, yeah. She's like, we're going back next week, right? And I'm like, yeah, we are. And from then, it was riotous. Every Wednesday, we carved out from 11:30 to 1:30, blocked our calendars so that people wouldn't set things so we could come to your noon class. And it was, judges would be like, I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm unavailable. I didn't say it was because I was going to yoga, but I was like, I'm unavailable. And we did that for probably a year or more, I think. And then I can't remember when you started the Saturday class, and then I started incorporating Saturdays and stuff like that. But that was it. And then from then on, I was like, well, I will practice yoga with this lady absolutely anywhere, including next to a dumpster.
And we eventually
Got
did
to
do that. We did do that in 2020.
Yeah.
Right outside of Kodawari. I think also I don't remember when our actual friendship started. Do you remember?
Yeah, probably we had a client that was executed, Larry Mann, and he was a wonderful, kind, sweet soul who did a terrible thing and then spent the rest of his life trying to atone for it. And his execution really affected me deeply. And I remember I booked a massage with you after, and you were like, I did the massage, I booked the massage after the execution. It was maybe a day or two later, and you were like, you're not, like, this one's on me, like, you do all the work. And I was just like, sobbing, of course. And I was like, this is something. This woman is something special. And you were doing yoga teacher training, and it was getting ready to start, I think, that August. And so my friend Colleen and I, who had met in your yoga class, decided to sign up. And so I think we started that in August of 2013. Of course, the day before we started, we got devastating news on Clemente's case, who was my innocent client, and I was a hot fucking mess that whole first weekend.
That is what I remember.
Yeah, and
That
for
is
me, it was
right.
like, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be.
And Lori Royalty was also in that class, and she, as we both know, has since passed.
Yeah.
And I just remember Lori's struggle, your struggle. I was like, what did I get myself into? Because our first weekend was loaded with intensity.
Yeah.
The courage and the vulnerability that people had to show up, and luckily could be honest about, hey, this isn't easy for me because, and that level of share really made that first class, which was, I think we had 26,
I think so, somewhere in there.
24, 26 YTT, yoga teacher trainees, and it was such a sharp learning curve for me also. And since that time, and I think this is where we're headed next, as a confluencer, concomitant growth is around understanding trauma, how trauma changes the way the brain works, how as the brain changes, behavior changes, and it can go both ways. I don't think I need to say this for your benefit any longer. We can do a whole bunch of healing, and your decision making gets better, becomes more inclusive. We can, in the healing, can start to understand the impact that we have as individuals on the world, and we'll do the starfish conversation in a minute. And equally, you can go the other way. If you are left out in the world alone, or feel left out in the world alone, your decision making can spiral downward into a very singular vision of what it is to try to fight for your survival, and the decisions you make from that place are anything but inclusive, and they have a strong negative impact in the world. And I think as our commitment to our friendship has grown, so has the commitment to sharing, like, where the learning about how does movement impact our ability to make better decisions. All the things that are the 7 tenets of Elemental Podcast. You and I share a lot of stories that illustrate how important those 7 things are to what I would call now discernment and the application of skillful means to align around moral choices. And that makes it sound faith-based, and it isn't that it can't be faith-based, and yet the conversation is about compassion, grasping that if you don't have a good context, a social network, mentors, resources, because I think where I want to go with this is one of the most illuminating conversations that I still use to explain this to people. Is I remember you telling me about the court board that you have, that when you take on a new case, part of the research that you do is to say, okay, here's this person. What does their family tree look like? And then there's colored flags for physical abuse, divorce, sexual transgressions,
Substance abuse, mental illness.
substance abuse, mental illness, neglect, essentially adverse childhood experiences that add up to a different brain, a radically different brain. And I remember you just saying, and I'm still moved by it, like when you get the picture, what you're looking at is what feels like an oak tree that looks like a fucking Christmas tree with color. You know, it's not a bunch of college degrees.
Right.
High,
Supporting loving family members and stable financial position and housing and food and all of the things that a lot of people take for granted.
and I just remember thinking, I can see that in my mind. I can see this wild coloration, and one part of me wants to think, oh, Christmas trees, you know, blinking reds and greens and blues and whites and, you know, all the colors. Isn't that pretty? And then you start to know that the red flag equals, and the blue flag equals, and the yellow flag equals, and all of it is shitty, 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 painful, 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 painful. And then when you come back to what happened, and it starts to become this conversation that you and I have discussed endlessly, like what happened to you?
How do we get here?
And what happened, what didn't happen for you, tells the story of like the people that you're trying to say, would we be any different if that was our picture of our family, our setup, our environment? And the answer is unequivocally no, it wouldn't be any different. And it's not just yoga, but how does movement empower you to look at that picture and not shut down?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of different ways, you know, having done this work for so long and having like, doing it with many colleagues, like I watch all the both healthy and unhealthy coping mechanisms. And there is a place where you have to just sort of be able to disconnect and desensitize
Wall off.
with it. And for me, movement is that, right? Like if I can go for a long bike ride or a run or a swim, when I can just move my body, or I mean, I love to hike. It's like you're out there and there's nothing else that I can sort of focus on. My body is in nature. My body is physically moving, so I'm a little bit distracted and my mind can be a little quieter. And so that is something that I'm always like, I gotta go for a run. And sometimes it's violence. If I'm being honest, it's like I want to go run until my heart explodes. Like I've said that to you a number of times, because it's like I don't know what else to do with the pain, right? I don't want to just like, I'm not a big drinker, like, and I have a whole bunch of, you know,
Reasons not to drink.
for that and history of my own self, but like, and my own experiences, but it's just like, I gotta do something with this pain.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like, movement is at least a slightly healthier way to do it, although, I mean, you and I know I have definitely been in an excessive place of movement from time to time.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is both a beautiful and it's a cautionary tale, and I appreciate the vulnerability and the honesty, right? Because I probably would have pulled the fucking covers off your bed anyway,
Of course.
right? Because it is a place for others.
Yeah.
A lot of people potentially will sound egoic, and I feel safe enough with you to let that come out and then also address it. People look up to you. They look up to me. They're like, oh, you have all your shit together. Sometimes, sometimes I have my shit together.
And all the things I say, I need to say to myself, so that's why I say it.
And we're still vulnerable to overdoing or underdoing critical pieces. So like, okay, we've decided, certainly over the last decade of our life, I'm gonna drink less. You and I just the other day, you had a beer, and you were like, my goddamn whoop!
It's like, are you dying? What's happening?
Why? And I had a tequila the other night at dinner and slept like shit.
Yeah.
And you were talking about 2 ounces of alcohol.
Oh yeah, I mean, my law school self would be very embarrassed by me now, but that's okay. I'm happy with it.
But so there's things that we now do way less of, and then in your case, I don't know that I use as much movement as you do. You use a lot of movement, and there are times like I say to you, too much.
Yeah.
Too much. You're hiding in the movement.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And extreme-ish, right? Like I like to climb very tall mountains and push myself to the edge of my physical capacity. And sometimes it's not. There's a balance there that I fall off the wagon on. I like to say like there's a balance between like hard things and stupid things, and like sometimes I slide off into the stupid things. It's like bravery is doing something knowing it's gonna hurt and doing it anyway. Stupidity is the same. That's why life is hard. And I think that is just so true for me when I look at something like, all right, do I need to do this extreme thing?
Yeah.
Or not, right?
Is
Where's that
15
line?
miles enough versus 50?
Right.
Right? Like I'm sorry to whomever I'm about to really offend. If you're an ultra marathoner, I am absolutely fucking no doubt that you have trauma that you are not addressing.
Yep.
You are ultra marathoners, big adrenaline junkies. You just give me enough time and you will tell me about the fuckery that is in the background of your heart and mind that you're trying to avoid. So sorry, you're showing your cards. And where I can, if I can, and this is we'll pick up in a minute on the starfish conversation. Because the other thing that I'm moving through too many topics, give me a second. So even that, knowing that sometimes you overdo the movement, and that might on some level diminish your capacity to get into it, the corrective work, the compassion work. Like if you're worn out and you're dehydrated and you can't get enough sleep, your decision making the next day is compromised. And so there's this beautiful sort of feedback loop. Am I doing the thing, movement, nutrition, sleep? Because also you can oversleep. If you're depressed, that's not your problem. But I know people that do.
Oh, for sure.
They'll be getting, 12, 14 hours. They'll nap in the middle of the day as well as getting 12 hours in the night because they don't want to deal with their waking self. So you can overdo all these healthy things. And does that in the next day diminish your capacity to be compassionate, present, responsive versus reactive? This is the question. And sometimes you have to burn your toast. You have to, I want to make toast. Well, toast has fire associated with it. If you don't pay attention, mindfulness, you might turn that toast into fucking carbon, and then you're not going to eat it.
Right.
It's not going to, what do you need, bub? Get up here and stop showboating. No? Okay. He's like, I'm demanding. That's fine. So, I think this is a good time for the analogy that we often give to one another as a remembrance, which is the starfish story. Who told it to you first, and can you tell it?
Gosh, I don't know where I heard it first, read it first. I feel like I read it somewhere back, early 20s, college, maybe. It might even have been, my mom has these little guidepost books. It might even have been in there. I'm not really sure.
Your mom's weirder than owl shit.
I love her, but
Yeah.
she's an odd duck sometimes.
Yep.
And the starfish story is it's told in many different variations, but a woman is sort of walking along the beach, and there's a whole bunch of starfish that have washed ashore overnight, and the tide has gone out, so they're all on the beach and they're kind of drying up. And she's walking along, and if they don't go back into the ocean, they're going to die. They're going to dry up and die. And so she's kind of walking and tossing them back in the ocean as she's walking. And her friend comes up and is like, what are you doing? And she's like, I have to take these starfish and put them back in the ocean or they'll die. And the woman looks at her and is like, there's thousands of miles of beach and thousands of starfish. You can't it's a reminder. Jonathan McLeod painted me a starfish picture, and it's in my office. He brought it to me after, I think it was after an execution last year, and it's like I look at it all the time, right? It's like there's a reminder. It does matter. What we're doing matters, and you
And sometimes
never know.
we're the starfish.
Right. Right.
This is where community comes in.
Yeah.
I need sometimes somebody to throw me back into the water.
Yeah.
Right? And our friendship is this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And
Sometimes I'm like, Maria, you're on the fucking beach here. You're getting dry.
Yeah. We gotta go. We gotta
into
go back
the
in.
water.
Yeah. And so it's just for me that when things, because things do feel overwhelming. I mean, you turn on the news and you're just like, I don't want to know. I don't want to know any of these things. And it feels like just bury yourself in whatever it is that you bury yourself in, and disconnect and not have connection and isolate and all of that. And we have to try not to do that.
So that's again a great segue into how I believe you teach and use your yoga practice is to build what I would call a greater capacity for resilience. So we, you said sometimes we do hard things, sometimes it becomes a stupid thing.
I know as a teacher, you kind of jokingly say, "Which one is this for you today?"
Yeah.
Right? And um, I feel so strongly that resiliency is this increasing, an effort to increase our capacity to feel. So, where in your yoga practice do you still today know that's happening? Because is there a finite amount of resiliency? And where else do you build your resiliency? Because feeling is how we connect, and not feeling is how we disconnect. And this speaks to the trauma that your clients have. Because it was so dangerous and potentially life-ending for them to feel neglect, abuse, physical, sexual transgressions, lack of resources, secondary class citizenship. I mean, we can go on and on. Eventually they become numb. And then it's not a big reach to kill somebody that's pissed you off.
Right. You don't have the capacity
To know
right. You don't
what
have the
the
capacity
impact.
for kindness, you don't have the capacity to do any of it.
But man, it's gotta feel, even to us, it feels dangerous sometimes. The amount of feeling I have can drown me.
Yeah. I think it's just the lesson of like it's gonna be different. So the feeling of the intensity of the feeling, no matter, I try when it arises to sit with it where I can and know that it'll shift and change. And I lead in a similar way to you. Like I call my students to the top of the mat and I ask them to put thumbs into chest and soft body and pause for 30 seconds. And just in that moment, whatever we know it's 30 seconds, right? We're not gonna stay here forever. So in that 30 seconds, can you just feel whatever it is that you're feeling, the intensity, whatever, and just sort of sit with it. And then I invite them always, right? Later on today, when things are too much, when you need a minute, when you're like completely overwhelmed.
I hear your yoga teacher voice right now.
Right? Like come there, stand there. And Charlie Martin was like, I had a patient and it was really challenging and I walked outside the room and I put my thumbs against my chest and I breathed. I did it in court. Like 3 weeks ago in our trial, somebody I think snapped a picture. The judge was like really irritated and I was like ready for violence and I was just like, because it works, right? It's that ability to like feel the intensity and I'm not trying to like shrink it or diminish it, but I cannot react in the way that I want to react, which is set everything on fire.
Yeah, you tell somebody to go fuck themselves.
Right, and it's like, so it's a matter of sort of controlling that, but it's not controlling it by squishing it or don't have that experience or patting somebody or like shh, right? Like no, that's not what this is. But then I think there are definitely times, and this is sort of I think speaking to your question of how do I build it in other ways, like when there's an execution and I can't, like it's too much, I just go around the people that I love, right? And I
Co-modulation.
right, and I'll go to Jeff's, I'll come to you, I'll go somewhere and just say like I don't want to hear. And sometimes you just need to be like, I'm done now for the day.
Yeah, enough.
Yeah.
That also speaks to community, right? And we've touched this over and over again, that addiction, whether that's to alcoholism, to porn, to booze, drugs, shopping, fucking, all of the things that you do to try to numb it out, right? Because that feeling of like, this is so much, I don't know that I have the capacity to let it change.
Yeah.
I'm gonna reach for a drink.
Yeah, I'll say things like, I need to I can't unsee that or unhear that, and I need to turn my brain off.
And you go into community to let your body be safe, your brain be protected, and turn off. And the thing that's super important for me is, again, I'll happily never unhear Johan Hari's comment that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. And how do we create spaces for safe connection? And I mean, so resiliency, the thing that we're attempting to build, is not about not feeling, but rather allowing feeling and the feeling to change.
Yeah, and knowing that it's not pointless. It is not going to stay the same,
No.
right? The depths of sort of whatever you're feeling are I mean, over time. I think about that. I'm in the car sometimes, and like a song comes on that I love, and I'm just like, the joy of the radio, the music blasting. You just feel that like, yes. And I know, like, in 10 minutes, if somebody cuts me off, I'm going to be screaming at them. Not quite as bad as you, but
What?
So it's like, that's a perfect moment in the car. Like, I might have one moment where I'm like, yes, and 10 minutes later, some asshole might have cut me off, and I'm losing my mind. So it's just that awareness of like, all right, I don't like this, and it's going to be different. Or I do like this, and it's also going to be different.
What else how else do you see your yoga practice? And I use yoga because we are in it together. I teach, you teach, we take, all the things. How else do you see that serving the function of regulation, co-regulation, capacity, resiliency? Is when you think about it and when you teach about it, beyond we can do hard things, what else is it that you're learning through movement or getting through movement?
I think for me, and I think this is something I'm so proud of with our school 6 a.m. community that we built, is this idea of you get to come and be exactly how you are. And that Kodawari in general embodies that, but it also in 6 a.m. I say it all the time because I've come into that space the morning after an execution, the morning after a devastating loss in court, and I'm a mess, an absolute mess. But being on the mat with my people is what I need. And we built this space together where it's okay. I don't have to say the perfect yoga words. I don't have to do the perfect sequence. We're here, we're together, it's messy, and we show up together. And so I think we've been able to give each other that permission. And so I'm really proud of that, and I think that does translate. Like, people will come into class in varying states, and some people will come in injured, they'll come in emotionally, physically, mentally, and they're like, I can't do any of the things, but I just want to be here. And that is something that is always, and I told that story the other day because you actually taught me that I had hip surgery
10 years ago now, 2015, and I couldn't practice for 8 weeks, and I was ready to murder all the people. And you're like, come to class and just lay there. And I was like, that's fucking stupid, because I was early on in my yoga practice back then. And I came, right? And I went and I practiced with you so much that even though I did no movement, I knew exactly where you were going. I heard the cadence of your voice, I heard the breath of everyone around me, and I felt better. It didn't feel the same if I had moved. I get that.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's all that it's going to be. And you and I have had this conversation a lot, which is like, at some point in our lives, we are not going to have the physical capacity that we have now. And at some point when I have a bad day, I'm not going to be able to go run 100 miles or bike or swim or climb a giant mountain. I'm not going to physically be able to do that. So I better start figuring out now how else to modulate
or you won't be the optimal expression
Right.
that you are seeking now to cultivate, that you seek now to cultivate, which is compassion, presence, authenticity. And if you have no way to off gas and or manage the internal pain that is not physical,
Yeah.
then you'll be less kind, less connected, and then it can spiral.
Right. So I think we do a really good job. I think Kodori in general, and I'm very proud of our 6 a.m. community, and that it's like you get to be how you are, who you are, always welcome, kind of warts and all. I am very much not a good vibes only person. You can come in here full of rage, full of grief, full of joy, whatever it is, you get to come in
Full of truth, your
Yeah.
current time truth.
Yeah.
Compassion in action in the world. Where do you see your career going? Because you and I have had the discussion that this expression of your career that you're currently involved in, which is this high degree of intimacy with people who've met, some that are innocent, truly innocent.
Yep.
You know, they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, not doing the worst thing, and got basically snagged in a snare. So I'm thinking of Clemente, of Shorty, like, okay, he went into the crime scene but did not commit the crime, and then got stuck with the crime, and you were able to help him be exonerated. And then there are people that we've had this discussion, which is a tough one. There are people that are so irrevocably broken, and yet still we have the conversation, is the death penalty is the way? And your answer is unequivocally no. Right? This is a litmus of our character as a collective.
Yeah, not do they deserve to die, do we deserve to kill them? Is sort of the reframe of the question.
Will you say that again?
The question is not do they deserve to die, it's do we as a society deserve to kill them?
Deserved. I in this moment I'm like, girl, you deserve so much more than that. And so deserve is such a fascinating, in that application, it's a fascinating.
Well, because in this sort of death penalty context, right? Like the idea under the law is that if the crime is sort of the most aggravated and the least mitigated, so it's like the worst possible thing you can think of, and the person doesn't have all the trauma factors that we talked about, which just
Doesn't ever fucking happen.
It just doesn't. I mean,
No.
I've been doing this for 18 years. I don't have a single death penalty client who's guilty, now innocent. I mean, we talked about Clemente, like I went to Honduras, I interviewed like 30 of his family. There was not a single piece of like, everyone's like, he won a singing contest, he's 4'11", he's like got this wide smile. Like there was not a single hint of any kind of violence, which is another reason why I knew that he was innocent of these murders. But so it's like, but for the most part, like none of my clients had happy, healthy, adjusted childhoods. They were loaded with trauma from the beginning. And so the question sort of is like, under the law, if they deserve or if their actions warrant the death penalty, it has to be under these factors. And for me, it's like, that's not the real question, because we now can safely keep people in prison for the rest of their lives without danger to others. And we can talk forever about statistics and all of that and sort of why the death
And
penalty
finances.
doesn't make sense and why it's wrong. But the real thing for me at the core of it is like, it just creates more victims and violence, right? I mean, we had 6 executions last year, and every single one of those men had somebody who loved them, and some of them it was people who after they came to prison, right? Because they never had any kind of connection with community, and then they get to death row, and lo and behold, they have a community for the first time, which is really fucking sad.
And strange.
Yeah, but like
Not common.
there are people that, every single person that was executed last year had a human being grieving for them, right? More loss. And there's just no need for that. Nothing about it makes our society sort of any safer. So, I mean, for me to sort of circle back to your other question is like, ending the death penalty is a career life goal of mine. I am in a place, and you and I have had this conversation of like, okay, what does that look like, and how, and also was just people who had already been sentenced to death and were already on death row. And so it's a little different. They're removed from the violence, right? And now I'm representing folks who are arrested for those violent crimes, and I'm seeing them within 24 hours of their arrest, often still recovering from the trauma, whatever, however it led them to be there. And so it's vastly different, and it's exhausting, and it's traumatizing and overwhelming.
And it can't be done forever. It can't be done
No,
forever, and to maintain health and
let's
vitality.
do me the favor and go back and say, I can't do this forever.
I can't do this forever.
I know.
At this level.
This is an
It's
ass
hard.
chapter.
Yeah, it's hard for me because it's such a fabric of who I am, and I'm so passionate about it. And what I have come to sort of realize, especially over time, is like, okay, but I can continue to train in sort of the next generation, right? And so I spent last week training young public defenders. I have a young our communications coordinator at my nonprofit is in law school, and like she's got it, she's got this ability to do this work, and if I can impart upon her all kinds of things, which also includes the self-care piece, which I've gotten better at as I've gotten older, but
Absolutely.
then okay, like I may not be in the fight when the death
In the
penalty-
same way.
I may not be like in the trenches when the death penalty ultimately falls, but that doesn't mean that my impact on the movement as a whole is any less. And that's a struggle for me to say no and believe. But I know
If we were flipped around and you were saying, I would say to you, if you're leaving this, you sort of leaving this fight or shifting your role in this fight does not diminish the contributions you made to it, I would believe that with my whole entire soul. And so I have to be able to flip that around for myself. And I'm working on it.
Yeah, because I want you around for as long as I can be around, if not more so, longer. Because you are ever so slightly younger than moi, just enough. So you got maybe just by virtue of years, you might have an extra decade on me. When I die at 110, you might have another 100. So I think, what do you call the work? Because I would like to put words in your mouth, but I want to hear from you. When you say this work, what is this work?
I think at its core, it's trying to explain that people are more than the worst things they've ever done. That we as a society, the less that we can otherize people, will create less violence,
Collective
less
violence.
victims, all of that. So like the way to sort of stop violence is by making sure that kids have enough to eat, have food, have shelter, have safety. And so the more that we collectively can do that, then it ripples out. And and the ones that aren't, right? There's studies that show like one person in a kid's life, a coach, a teacher, a mentor, they could have the
The next door
shittiest
neighbor.
home life you can imagine, and there's one person who's like, I see you. And that could be someone at our yoga studio, right?
Oh, fuck yeah.
Someone comes in and they're like, and I've seen it and you've seen it, where somebody's like lonely and this is their their weekly, daily yoga classes, their connection. But for Kodawari, they would be not okay. And so that we have to just keep doing that. So for me, okay, anytime I can make a connection with a person, you never know the ripple effect that you're gonna have.
And this is going to go back to, and we'll probably close today's conversation. This will go back to the elemental podcast reason. So these 7 things, if we add up what it means to the capacity to go day after day into the most compassionate expression of ourselves that we can foster, and you foster them through those 7 points. Self-care. You don't foster them from grinding out, not having eaten, not having had any water, not having any sleep. Sure, under duress, you can do that for a short period of time, and yet if you want to really do the work of stopping the violence, to have more peace, however you want to frame it, You gotta sleep, you gotta eat, you gotta hydrate, you gotta move, you gotta get out in the sunshine, you gotta have a community where you're celebrated, and you gotta keep your mind attentive on those things, so that from your overflow, we're staying connected, we're feeling, we're caring, we're doing the work. Our motivation becomes, I am that I see outside of myself. That is also me. And, obviously, I believe we have a huge Venn diagram overlap of, this ridiculous fucking Instagram bullshit of the science. For which I'm deeply grateful, because to talk about co-modulation, you're one of the people I call when I'm.
Yeah, I need to say these words, and I need you to bounce back around.
Yeah.
And we have people to do that. I'm blessed to have you in my life to do that, and we have to keep creating that and teach other people how to create that, and that's the
echo.
answer. Yeah.
That's the echo that I wanted to. So we will close it here. This idea that while you may have to shift the way in which you work, the echo, the momentum, the ongoing impact of you as Maria DeLiberato, the liberator, right?
That is how my name translates, yes.
The liberator, and the liberator maybe from pain and loneliness.
Yeah.
And in that connection and joy, there's less violence.
Yeah.
It just inherently is.
And we sort of continue to build more starfish collectors, more people.
And suddenly the
folks back into the ocean. And the
Yeah.
beach is empty.
and the beach is clear.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can do handstands and cartwheels, wear glitter. I'm grateful.